Hi, I was at our church's Easter service this morning, and they started with a video. And at the end of the video, they put these words on the screen: Jesus is alive. And for some reason, this morning, those words reminded me of a moment that happened 40 years ago for me, the most important moment of my spiritual life. So let me tell you a little bit about that. It was in 1978, at the end of my 10th grade year. It was actually about 1 in the afternoon, at the end of the lunch hour, on the last Wednesday of the school year. And it's the day that my faith became real for me. I would say that it's the day I was saved, or the day I was born again. Because for me, those terms, saved and born again, have a rich theological meaning. But they also carry some negative connotations for people, and they probably mean different things to different people. So for today, let me just say it's the day that my faith became real for me. But in order for you to understand what happened, I need to set the scene. Three things. First of all, a senior named Tommy had been talking to me for 2 days about my need to accept Jesus as Lord and Savior. So he was telling me that Jesus died for my sins on the cross, and I needed to trust all that I had to him in order to be saved. And I agreed with that. And I believed, like him, that it was the difference between my going to heaven and going to hell. So I thought this was the most important decision I could ever make. And it was much more important to me at that moment than everything going on in school. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to believe. It seemed like I was supposed to give my whole life to God, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to do that, and I wasn't sure if my belief was real. So I was struggling that whole time with, do I really believe this or not? The second thing was that during the 24 hours leading up to this moment, I had been sensing the presence of God very strongly. I didn't see visions or hear voices or anything, but the sense of God being there was almost palpable, definitely a goosebumps type of thing. And it was consistent for almost 24 hours. It's like the air was thick with the presence of God. There was a weight, a heaviness to it. And I felt as though God was there with me, thinking through things with me, and watching to see what I would decide. And maybe, I was hoping, helping me make the decision if I needed his help. The third thing was that Tommy had shared a Bible verse with me to think about. And it was a familiar verse for those of you who know the stuff. It was Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you shall be saved. So I was getting ready to go to class, and I was thinking about that verse. And I understood why it said, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, because after all, it seemed like if I wasn't willing to let Jesus be Lord, if I wasn't willing to surrender my life to him, then I probably really wasn't trusting him with my life, and that probably wasn't a real belief. But I couldn't figure out why it was important to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Why did that matter to salvation? So then I started thinking, well, do I believe that Jesus has been raised from the dead? And I did believe it, at least as a historical fact, because I've been raised with that belief. I just never really doubted it. I assumed it was true. But I started wondering, do I believe in my heart? And what does that mean? And is that belief something real to me? And it was at that moment that something happened that for me was incredibly important, but it happened in just an instant. My perspective shifted. I've heard of something called a Gestalt switch, and I don't know what it really means, but the way I've heard it described, it's that moment when your understanding of something as a whole shifts. And so just because you're looking with a new perspective, with a new way of seeing it, everything shifts in what you're seeing. It reminds me of those times, I don't know if you've ever looked at a picture or a video and not known what you're looking at, and it just seems like a random jumble of shapes and colors, and you can't make any sense of it. And then suddenly you realize what it is you're looking at, and the whole thing suddenly makes sense. Every piece fits together and it snaps into focus. And that's what happened here, except it was a shift between two perspectives. One moment, the presence of God was here with me, and I was asking myself, do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead 2,000 years ago? And the next moment, with no transition, suddenly the presence of God was Jesus himself looking at me, talking to me, and saying, Kevin, do you believe that I'm alive? And once I realized that's what it was, I was responding to a real person. The answer was obvious. Of course I believe you're alive. I'm talking to you. Of course I believe you're alive. You're asking me if you are. And just like that, I moved from belief in a doctrine about an event 2,000 years ago to trust in a real person who was spiritually present to me. And that was the moment for me that my faith became real. There's a lot more, but that was the key moment. That was the moment that I was saved, or the moment I was born again. And it's definitely changed my life completely ever since. Now, the feelings were just something God used me, I think, to get me to the place of trusting him. They eventually faded. And I've had feelings like that again in my life a few times, but Not always, not all that often, and usually not as strongly. But the faith that he pushed me to have is still the most important thing to me. I still see my walk with God as a personal relationship with a living Savior day to day. And that's what that message on the screen meant to me today. Jesus is alive. It meant that I serve a living Savior, as the song says, who's in the world today. So happy Easter.